Professor Tanja Bueltmann, please take to the stage and give a warm round of applause for Tanja.
I was going to make a queue jumper joke anyway, but now I guess I definitely can. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and I guess going by the program, I'm not actually jumping the queue, but I was going to say that because I'm kind of jumping the queue, because thanks to Lord Neuberger, I can speak in the first place, because he gave me a little bit of time, so thank you very much for that. I'm also going to try and be very German and super efficient, so maybe we can make up a little bit of the time. But don't forget, I'm talking here as an individual, but I'm really talking about and for 5 million people, and I mean EU citizens at home in the UK, 3.6 million people like me who chose to come here and make our home here, and also our British friends who live in the EU, because together we were severely affected a couple of weeks ago by the denied my vote scandal, or that's what it has become known as. So the EU elections, of course, to us had a really special meaning in a sense, because it was the first time that we actually had some sort of say in all this Brexit catastrophe. Because don't forget, we've talked a lot about the manipulations of the referendum and democracy. Well, what is a democracy if those most immediately affected by the outcome of the referendum have no voice in the actual referendum? Now, I know that's a slightly separate question, but it is so important in this context, because that's why, to many EU citizens, the possibility of casting a vote in the EU elections was even more important, perhaps, than it might have otherwise been. And that's not least the case because, of course, we can choose. We can choose to vote in the country of our citizenship or, well, now also in the UK. And many EU citizens chose to do that because this is our home, something that many people seem to be impossible of conceiving as a reality, but it is. So what happened? If you are on Twitter, you probably saw really quickly on the day of the EU elections that the hashtag trending at #1 really quickly in the morning was not actually the one for the EU elections, but was the one called Denied My Vote. And that was because so many EU citizens were sharing their stories of having arrived in the polling station, finding their names crossed out on the list. I mean, just the very thought of it actually makes me quite physically sick, considering the context of this, you know, walking into the polling station, see your name crossed out, because they hadn't signed the so-called declaration form. Now, in itself, this is a known problem because the same thing happened in 2014 already, because we have to register to vote, but we also have to sign this other form. That is a British peculiarity, if you like it. It's an EU law, but this is the British interpretation of it, that there is this second form that you have to sign. I actually couldn't vote, or rather my proxy, in the 2014 election for that reason, so I know exactly what it felt like, or what it feels like to be not allowed to vote. So a lot of people arrived and found out that way. Many people already knew beforehand, however, because we actually all, or campaigners at least, knew beforehand that this was about to happen. And to my mind, that is the actual scandal, because this is something that we knew was a problem, yet here we are. And we knew this because of what happened in 2014 and because the Electoral Commission, our friends there again, failed again, really, because they didn't take action. They promised after 2014 that they would take action, and they didn't really. Now, they tell us now that Brexit or the EU referendum is kind of the reason for that, because we thought we wouldn't have these elections. Well, what did they do between 2014 and 2016? So at a minimum, 2 years were wasted already, and that's how we ended up there. Now, I don't really believe in conspiracies. I've seen quite a lot of people on Twitter share all sorts of stories. If nothing else, I just don't think the government is actually capable of one. What we can say is that what happened in the EU elections to so many EU citizens and also British in Europe is based really on choices, and that's what makes a big difference here, because it could have been prevented and it wasn't. So as I say, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but choices were made. The Electoral Commission chose not to take action, not to tell councils, for example, to send us this form or to provide it in some easy, accessible way. Some councils did, other councils didn't. That's why it's a bit of a hodgepodge of a situation. But also other choices, for example, by the Prime Minister. So Joanna Cherry, who will talk after me, tried one day before the election, one more time, to try and get the Prime Minister to recognize that this is a problem. With cross-party support she did, and asked the question in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister didn't even answer the question, and by choosing that, effectively confirmed that the next day, denied my vote would happen. And that is why I think we can talk about this in terms of a deliberate voter suppression, because other choices could have been made and they were not made. And that's very clear. Now, as I say, this was happening to the group already most disenfranchised in this whole process, and that makes that even more catastrophic, really. And for British people who live in another EU country, the problem was for those who wanted to choose to vote in the UK. So some received their postal ballots after the election date, things like that. Some councils seem to have used low-cost carriers that already tell you on their website that they take 2 weeks to deliver a letter. So there's a series of issues here that really need proper investigation. And they also need proper investigation because of what has happened since. The Electoral Commission has already basically pushed away any responsibility or recognition of that. Worse, they have taken issue, it seems, with the fact that so many EU citizens have complained. So that's, of course, not a good look. I've already said that on Twitter, but I want to emphasize that. The scale of the problem isn't quite clear. We do know that the 3 Million, an NGO looking after our rights here in the UK, prepared a form that people could use. It was downloaded 5,000 times. So that is maybe not as big as you think, but actually, 5,000 people going to download that form is quite something. Now, critically, as I say, I have to wrap up because I'm being told off. I think denied my vote cannot end with denied my vote. It has to have a legacy. And the legacy has to be that we have a discussion, a proper discussion about the franchise in this country. That is not just a point about EU citizens, we are kind of in the firing line, but it's also about British in Europe who've been out of the country for more than 15 years and cannot vote. It is also about all other immigrants who are disenfranchised in this system. So, I will wrap up now, I promise, but I am wearing, well, different statements today, but this one is one I really wanted to talk about at the end. Nevertheless, she persisted. I will continue. It is all of our duty to continue, because as a German and as a historian, I know where this ends, and I'm not prepared to accept that. We have to take a stand. We all have to persist for denied my vote in that context, but for democracy more broadly as well. Thank you.
Tanja Bueltmann, everybody.